From infant killers to horrific homicides that would make the devil blush. The story of Jaime Osuna is one of the most chilling stories we have shared so far. Often we see criminals who have appearances that don't match up with their crimes, which often helps them go undetected. In the case of Jaime Osuna, however, his Joker-like smile and the satanic symbol tattooed across his face made him look like a villain straight out of a horror movie. Jaime's crazy antics began very early. At the young age of 8, Osuna killed animals out of pure enjoyment. For example, his mom once left the house to visit some local stores, and so the young boy put the family cat in the freezer. As you do. At around this time, his stepfather was physically abusing Osuna, something that didn't stop until he left home in his teens. Jaime's brother Kurt was also abused, but managed to escape by going to live with his grandparents, something Jaime always resented. It was also claimed that his stepfather would make Jaime eat on the floor like a dog, while the other children sat at the table. This abuse no doubt played a role in young Jaime's twisted antics. While in his teens, Osuna joined local gangs. He abused drugs, especially meth, to cope with his terrible home life and mental issues. When he was 15 years old, the police arrested him for assault with a deadly weapon. After that, he would find himself in handcuffs several times, having a history of drug possession, battery, and assault offenses. In 2008, Jaime met a woman named Joelle Castellano at a house party. The two dated for 2 years and got married in February 2010 at Osuna's grandmother's house. Despite the police arresting Osuna for injuring his wife and getting 9 months in jail, he came out on parole. In August 2010, Jane and Osuna welcomed their first and only child. Despite being in and out of prison, the arrest that sealed his notoriety happened in 2011, after the brutal torture and murder of 23-year-old Yvet Pina. Yvet Pina, a Sunday school teacher and mother of 6, met Osuna one day at the Morocco Hotel. The details about how Yvet was apprehended by her killer are murky, although one thing is known for sure, that Yvet met an awful end. So how did Yvet end up at the motel that day? Well, the truth is that she had moved there after facing personal struggles. In 2004, Yvet began using meth, which led her to losing custody of her children. Her struggles began before her drug use, with her suffering from sexual crimes when she was young. While she tried her hardest to leave her past behind and take care of her family, the mental scars were just too deep. By 2011, her addiction had well and truly taken hold, and she would often hang out with other users at the motel to take drugs. In fact, Yvet was arrested in February of this year for the possession of a controlled substance. While in prison, the woman gave birth to her 6th child. Soon after, she was released from prison after the charges were dropped. It was around November 7th that she met Osuna and others to use meth together in room 19. The next day, Osuna returned, but it wasn't the meth that was on his mind anymore. It was murder. Because the motel was on the bad side of town and had an even worse reputation, the odds are that anyone who did hear or know of the crime wouldn't have called the police. It is speculated that Osuna chose to live out his fantasy of torture and murder on Yvet because she resembled his wife, an older woman with similar facial features and green eyes. On the day of the murder, Osuna caught his victim off guard, going from a friendly guy to a violent monster in seconds. After striking the woman with a blunt object, he went on to slice and stab the woman. At some point in the attack, he stuffed a piece of clothing into her mouth and continued torturing her for hours. Eventually, Yvet's pain stopped as her body gave in to the heinous attacks of the man with the tattooed face. The sad thing about cases involving victims who are at a bad point in their life is that they are known or remembered for the things that they were involved with. Addiction or not, Yvet was described as a beautiful woman and a loving woman who would do anything for anyone. In fact, when she was a teen, she worked multiple jobs to save up for a toy for her baby sister. She had no second chance at overcoming her present struggles and building the life she desired. No one deserved the unthinkable treatment that Jaime Osuna inflicted, but what makes this case even worse is that this respected, innocent, and loving woman was dragged into a nightmare situation that made her last hours on Earth pure agony. Prosecutors said that the injuries she had suffered were truly horrific, with the lifeless body found gagged, with sharp objects still stabbed into the back of the poor woman. Although Yvet had been tortured, it was a combination of blunt force trauma, stab wounds, and asphyxia that finally killed her. During the interview following his arrest, Osuna openly said, "I did sadistically, premeditatedly, liberty, tortured, and murdered Yvet Pina." He went on to say, "The torture and all that is more of trying to get a rush. It's an addiction. It's a drug. I would rather do that than do drugs. I would rather do that than have sex. I don't care if you're a lawyer, a teacher, a gang member. I don't care if you're my brother or sister. I don't care if you're whoever. It's about my decisions at that time. It's self-gratification to me." This mentality shows how psychotic Osuna was. In fact, it's one of the most blatant disregards for life that we have ever seen on Twisted Minds, and if you are a fan of the channel, you know that's saying something. The torturing didn't stop with Yvet, as throughout the trial, Osuna did nothing but smile at the family while hearing about his grisly crimes. In fact, the killer was so relaxed that he got into a conversation about the Oakland Raiders as the paperwork was being sorted that would seal his fate behind bars for the rest of his life. It was actually Osuna's wife, Joelle Castellano Osuna, who tipped police to the murder days before Pina's body was found. According to Joelle, Jaime called her and told her to watch out for an incident that happened at the Morocco Hotel. When Joelle asked about what had happened, Osuna casually explained how a woman had been stabbed at the motel. Terrified, Joelle called the police. Unbelievably, the police never investigated the hotel and the murder. Several days after the phone call to the police, an employee at the El Morocco motel went into room 19 and found Pina's bloody and mutilated body. After the discovery, the police got back to Joelle and interviewed her, eventually piecing together the puzzle. When Jaime was arrested in 2011 for the horrific torture and murder of Yvet Pina, the courts denied Jaime Osuna bail, forcing him to stay locked up within Kern County Jail. In fact, his trial was delayed for so long that he spent the next 6 years waiting. In March 2017, he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and torture of Yvet Pina in exchange for immunity from the death penalty. In May 2017, the court sentenced Osuna to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During an interview, Osuna admitted to killing 2 other people when he was just 13, although these were never confirmed. When asked about details, Osuna only hinted that they were a 32-year-old woman and a 27-year-old man, and that they were left in the orchards. When asked if his previous murders were gang-related, Osuna said that none of his crimes were gang-related. So, why was this smug, psychotic, and narcissistic killer so shy about sharing details of his other crimes? Well, it's because he had an older friend who taught him everything and didn't want to say anything that could give his identity away. Of course, this all could be just ramblings of a madman trying to brag and increase his body count. With no specific details or victims that could be linked to him, we will never know for sure. With that being said, there are so many cold cases throughout the United States alone that Jaime Osuna could be responsible for 2 of them. Although this is where most of our stories end for cold-hearted killers we cover, when it comes to Osuna, that really isn't the case. Unfortunately, the killings didn't end with Yvet, as even behind bars, the sadistic monster found his way to get his sick thrills. In the early morning hours of March 9th, 2019, Corcoran officials conducted a routine safety check on the cell of Osuna and his 44-year-old cellmate, Luis Romero. Looking over at Romero's bed, the guard found Romero's decapitated corpse, with Osuna wearing a necklace made out of Mr. Romero's body parts that he had cut out from his victim. In fact, Osuna cut out one of his cellmate's eyes, chopped off one of his fingers, took out some of his ribs, and sliced out a part of his lung. The sickening thing is, The coroner believed that Romero was still alive for a portion of the gruesome acts. The prison and guards were hit with a lot of criticism after this incident, as they were supposed to check on inmates every hour. This was clearly not the case, as all the mutilations would have taken hours to complete. Due to the lack of security and the ability to make and stash away a makeshift knife, the crazed Jaime Osuna was a kid in a candy store. After an extensive investigation, it turned out that 2 guards had lied about checking on the 2 prisoners, while another 2 eventually admitted to seeing the first 2 guards not doing their job properly. Romero had spent 27 years in prison at the time of his murder and was getting close to parole eligibility at the time of his death. He had been convicted of second-degree murder after fatally shooting a woman in Compton as a teenager after being involved with a gang. Osuna was later transferred to Salinas Valley State Prison Psychiatric Inpatient Program after being diagnosed with unspecified schizophrenia spectrum, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. Because of the mental troubles of the man, a judge ruled Osuna mentally unfit to stand trial for the brutal cell killing. Unbelievably, this wasn't the first time that Osuna had attacked a fellow inmate, as he once found his way into another prisoner's cell and stabbed and slashed at his face. This crazed attack resulted in the man getting 67 stitches. When the prisoner was asked if photographs of his injuries could be taken, he refused, saying that he didn't want to risk Osuna getting copies of them to add to his collection of trophies. This goes to show how Osuna was thought of while locked away. A manipulative man who could find a way to do anything. After hearing about how he could sneak into other cells, create dangerous weapons, and brutally kill and mutilate his cellmate before wearing his body parts like he was trying on ties in Walmart, I think there was merit to this opinion of the satanic killer. Thankfully, no one else will have to stare into the cold eyes and clown-like face of Osuna, as he will spend the rest of his life in an isolated cell. After the killing of Romero and the failures of the police that come to light in the aftermath, it is unlikely that Osuna will ever find himself in a position to carry out his sadistic fantasies ever again. When questioned about his heinous acts, Jaime Osuna casually answered, "I have no sympathy. I'm sadistic. I'll do it over and over again. I love what I've experienced. To this day, if I can go back in time to change anything, would I? No. I would go back and do it again and over again. And if I'm released, I will probably end up here again with the same case." Did you guys get a shiver too? These words truly sum up how evil this monster is. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Jaime Osuna, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.